It's time for Halloween in the United States. It's a holiday that celebrates spookiness, scary stories, free candy, and costumes. Lots and lots of costumes. Around the world, this time of the year often marks a day that recognizes and reflects on our dearly departed friends and family. Called by many different names, many different cultures celebrate a version of All Saints' Day. In Mexico, this time of the year is marked by massive cultural celebration known as Dia de los Muertos, or Day of the Dead. However, along with this time can come a lot of cultural harm, especially as it concerns costumes. Many costumes in the United States that are carelessly commercialized rely on ancient cultural traditions or harmful cultural stereotypes. This is also known as cultural appropriation. At San Jose State University, every year we have promoted a campaign intended to educate around this cultural harm. We call it My Culture is Not a Costume. In this video, I'm joined by members of the Native American Student Organization at San Jose State, also known as NASO.
Hi everyone, my name is Cheyenne. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm a public health major. I'm a fourth year public health major and minoring in sociology. I'm also the leader of the Native American Student Organization.
Hello everyone, my name is Ilse Busarello. I'm a Chicanx Studies major with a minor in environmental justice, and I do the outreach for NASO.
We're talking about cultural appropriation, particularly how it has impacted the Native community in the United States. Thank you, Cheyenne and Ilse, for joining me today. I know that cultural appropriation is something that we've done programs about for the last few years at Mosaic, even before that, but, I wasn't here for that. I know it's something that's very passionate within NASA, within the both of you. Let's just go ahead and get started and talk about what cultural appropriation means.
Yeah, so if we could just kind of start with the definition. So basically what cultural appropriation is it defines race as performative and acting to express the power and privilege you have. And also just, using someone's cultural wear that they use, or some sort of something or an item from their culture, and using it to your own benefit, but not really understanding, what the significance is, what is the meaning that it holds to that population of people. And so, to kind of like break that down, let's think about history. Let's kind of think about just like the US, I guess. So the US has a history of, racism and, oppressing like Black, Indigenous, and people of color. But then here we are seeing a lot of people, dressing up as Native Americans and using sage, or, wearing box braids. And let me see, so I've even seen celebrities wearing cultural, I don't know how to pronounce it. It's a kipao, or do you know how to say it?
Yeah, it's a qipao.
Yeah, that too. And I don't think people realize like the kind of emotional hurt that comes to that, but also it's just kind of like we've had this history of oppression amongst various groups of people, and on stolen land, and people are pretending to be from that group, which are usually, white Europeans.
I was just thinking about the word like cultural appropriation and how it's like the things people wear, but it's also just like culture is so broad, and it's like groups can appropriate even in the way that they do things, like the system of things that they don't give credit to. So like, for example, national parks. So just think about like the spiritual practices that happen there, and like some of them being sacred burial sites, or just like rivers that have existed for so long, only touched by that community, that can come and just like at any moment the government can feel like they have the power to just come in and disrupt that. But I'm thinking about like lands. I just think about how like the farming practices that are now being used and popularized, you know, and just like considering the times we live in, right? And so there's like this big boom in the idea of like local farming, how that is like the new thing, you know, but it's kind of violent in the way that those systems already existed before people started capitalizing off of them. And it's like they went and they like wiped out these indigenous communities, also brought like indigenous communities from Africa, made them work this land and developed this entire system of agriculture just to be realize that it doesn't work, and that it's more, it causes more damage to humans than it does. And so I just think about how like now these things are so expensive, but yet indigenous communities are suffering from like from COVID and also just like poor healthcare. So it's like now these ideas are monopolized and they're seen as something that's new, but like many of these systems already existed. Or just thinking about how like indigenous communities were like civil engineers and they were environmental engineers, and that got wiped out just to fast forward, and people are like, this is the way to do things, when like many of that stuff shouldn't have been destroyed in the first place, but also doesn't get credited.
Like cultural appropriation also just ignores the history of racism and colonization, you know, like when white people wear it, it's trendy and cool, but when the people who wear, you know, actually wear their clothing or use the things that are special to them, you know, they're still discriminated against because of their culture and what they believe in. And, you know, this ignores the history of white people, you know, stealing from racial minority group possessions and then just kind of just calling it their own. But let's also keep in mind that, you know, anyone can culturally appropriate another culture, not just white people. Like it grows the function to make white privilege invisible, you know?
Let's talk about some examples of this last thing you were talking about, Cheyenne.
Yeah.
So you mentioned, you know, times in which somebody might wear something or do something that's kind of culturally significant for one group, but is not recognized for them. Do we have any examples of that we can think of?
Yeah, so like sage, and then using the abalone shell, you know, to smudge. Also, you know, when people try to wear regalia, you know, regalia in a lot of American Indian culture is like, is used for like powwow culture basically, but regalia is sacred and it means a lot to the person who wears it, and they have to earn it, as well as anyone who wears a headdress. And usually that is men, but for some tribes, women are allowed to wear it as well. But those are some specific examples that are extremely hurtful to, you know, many groups of American Indians. So,
and the thing is, like, these communities then are told that they're gatekeeping, when it's like some of these things are sacred, like, and you know, not anyone can just wear, like, you can't just wear them without understanding, or if the community doesn't want that, then it's like you can't force it, or you can't just ignore when they say to not do something or not wear something, unless, I don't know, it's similar.
I think it's important also to think about the fact that some of this stuff, you know, when folks of color, when Black folks, Indigenous folks, they're trying to represent their culture, in those instances, you know, you see dominant cultures like white culture, white supremacy, create systems of oppression around that, right? So you'll see, you know, for example, in the business world, you know, having braids might be seen as unprofessional, right? And so somebody who's wearing braids will, you know, be passed up for promotion or be, you know, not given a job because they're seen as being unprofessional. When in reality, those braids not only are, you know, representational of culture, but might even just be survival strategy, right? Because you know, sometimes hairstyles are the way they are because that's the only way that you can manage, hair in that way. And, for a culture in which the individuals in that culture don't have to struggle with that, then to also then impose rules on top of it is destructive.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think we should also like kind of think about like, okay, just because one person from that group has told you, apparently has told you, no, I don't think that's offensive at all. Keep in mind that there are people from several groups that are still able to be ignorant. Anyone could be ignorant. It doesn't matter what racial or ethnic background that you come from. There's still going to be people who, they still have colonial views, but that's not their fault, because they don't know any better. But one person does not speak for a whole group. So because there have been many times when people have said, well, I don't think the headdress is offensive because I have a friend that's American Indian and they said that it's not, but that's
Mm-hmm.
not technically true, because if you were to ask an entire population of people or anyone on Twitter, they would not say that at all.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And you know what? I was just also thinking about like slang, and how like it's even called slang, or like that it can't be used in professional spaces because, but yet it can be used only commonly, when like some of these words, most of them are created by the Black community or by communities of color, or they're words that derive from like native language. But why is it called slang, and like why is it bad to use it? Why is it unprofessional to like say certain things? I mean, some things, yes, I understand, but it's like
Mm-hmm.
derogatory terms versus just like a word that's used to describe something. Like I think about that too, and how like slang is just demonized. But then if you think about it, now they're adopting words that like the word y'all, like that's created by communities of color to refer to like an entire group of people. Yet now and like before it was just like, does that make am I making sense? Like
Yeah.
now people are starting to adopt it and be like, oh, like that's inclusive, but before that would have been like the wrong way to address a group of people.
While we're talking about language too, the other side of it comes through too, where terms or phrases have been lifted out of cultures and adopted by a majority culture like white culture or white supremacy,
Mm-hmm.
without an understanding of where that phrase or word comes from. I'm thinking, particularly against Native communities, phrases like spirit animal or totem pole get thrown around a lot. And
Mm-hmm.
it's those phrases embody entire ideals or entire swaths of ideas, and people don't necessarily understand what that means.
Yeah, it's
Mm-hmm.
also just like the way, like also like tribe, like that's not an appropriate word to use because first of all, you're not from a tribe. Second of all, a tribe is a group of people. It's like family. It's their way of life, and it's the way that they take care of their people. They take care of the land, and the way they do their spiritual practices and how they care for each other. And so the meaning of it is way more deep rooted than people may think it is. And it's just, we've been oppressed for so many years. Like Native people haven't been able to express their culture since the 1970s, like when they were actually able to do it by law, because it was illegal to practice their culture before then. But then now, people want to use it as this like trendy, like, oh yeah, this is my tribe, but like, we have
Mm-hmm.
been oppressed for our culture for so many years, and so it's okay for you to say it now, but it's like, and for you to like express things from, different Native cultures, but then like, it's very like contradicting, and it's very offensive.
Yeah, it's true. Like when I was young, I knew like my grandpa would send us bags that he would make himself, like portraits that he would make himself through the mail. And I was like, man, and he would tell us too, like he's proud to be Yaqui. But I feel like when I was younger, that wasn't something that I could say openly because people would probably just be like, what is that? Or like, what does that mean? So I feel like for like native people that have native ancestry but are displaced. It's like difficult to until you're invited in spaces where you're like, I'm curious because I know this of myself, but like then that's how it was with me with Nassau. I was like interesting, like this is a space it was the first time I remember, like when I first saw the Instagram, I clicked on the person that was like doing the like running it at the time, and I saw the word yaki, and I was like, I have not seen that word or like someone refer to them as that anytime ever in my life. So it's like the whole thing of people just being like, yeah, I'm this, and like, yeah, I'm that. It's hard when it's like not, it's an identity that you always have known that has existed, rather than like something that someone would just choose to label themselves just to do it. Like, I don't understand.
Like now you want culture, but back then, like, it wasn't okay. Like that's not how this works.
Hmm. Yeah, I think what's important to remember is that while it's okay for you all to celebrate these things, and I think we encourage folks to celebrate their cultures. Um, Part of what we're reacting against is the fact that when you were younger, or in the past, or historically, these cultural identifiers would be reasons to oppress you, right? So I think of like the history of Indian boarding schools in the United States, and how the English and the Spanish went out of their ways to try to erase Native culture, and
Yeah.
would force people to go to school and learn Christianity, and abandon the culture that they grew up with.
There have been so many like different ways and ways of assimilation that like the Spanish and Europeans have brought on to many like Black, Indigenous, and people of color like populations. And like, why is it that it was so bad for us to practice our culture, and then now for some reason, like you go in a magazine or you go to Coachella, you go to raves, and people are wearing like
articles of clothing. I was just thinking about that when you mentioned the 1970s. I was like, damn, they really culturally appropriated in the 70s. Like, the whole hippie culture, all of that, like the things that they would wear, the dream catchers.
Yeah, and I think it's important to know that like there, like in Native cultures, there's so many different tribes, so many different histories, so many different languages or people, that it can seem, for people who are outside of the Native culture, right? We don't understand, just how complicated it is and how complex it is. So, like Dreamcatchers, for instance, for me growing up, all I knew about Dreamcatchers was like, here's how you make it. It's like a second grade craft project,
Yeah.
and I've no idea where it comes from. I don't know what tribes are associated with it. I have no idea, what materials are traditionally used, or if there are any rituals that surround it. It's just like a fun crafty thing that you learn in elementary school.
Yeah, a lot of people don't know, and I believe I'm getting it correctly, but double check me in the comments if it's not true. But I've heard that dream catchers come from the Anishinaabe and the Ojibwe cultures, and usually I don't want to speak for them, for this population of people, but I do know that even like other tribes have culturally appropriated other tribes' culture, which is because a lot of people think like American Indian culture is all the same. Like we all believe in the same thing. We're all the same culture. It's not that. We're all very, very different.
Especially when they're from different regions, like the West Shoshone are from one region, right? And the Yaqui are from a different region. So it's going to affect the culture. It's going to affect the food. That's another thing, like the whole thing of like being vegetarian, being vegan, but then some indigenous cultures still eat meat, but that they have their way of like hunting for that, and it's like, and like they're being told like what they're doing is wrong, but also it's their culture, like I don't know, or like certain ways of like fishing
Mm-hmm.
that they have practiced for like forever. So
Mm-hmm.
it's just like when they get hate for it, that's violent too. When something becomes like American culture, it's like considered the right way.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the problem. But it's like white American culture, you know?
Yeah.
Like in that, but it's like, you know, everyone has a choice in that, you know? And just speaking for like just images I've seen or like specific traditions people do. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But like, let's also like, for the people who are watching, like there's a
Mm-hmm.
difference between appropriation and appreciation. So
Mm-hmm.
let's kind of just think about what appreciation would be like. So, because a lot of people say, well, I'm not appropriating because I'm appreciating your culture. Like, don't you want me to wear your culture's, don't you want me to wear like what you wear and kind of like represent you guys? Don't you want representation? That's not how any of that works. So, when we appreciate people, we listen to the people, like to what these people would like or prefer. Well, so listening to the people, to the culture you're interested in, and showing that you have a genuine love, respect, and understanding of something that isn't your own. So even if you have genuine feelings of wearing, something that's not even regalia, but it looks like it, like that's still not appreciating, because you still have people saying like, hey, this is very disrespectful and you can't do this. If you go to any urban native community or a reservation, like they're gonna like, if you touch someone's regalia, or if you even try to mimic something like that, you will be pushed out of that group or community, or you just will be called out for that, because it's not okay. And this goes for any ethnic or racial group. That's
Mm-hmm.
disrespectful, because you didn't earn that. You didn't earn, like, you weren't brought in by the community, and you didn't do the work and the effort and brought the love and the genuine, work into that. So let's kind of talk about what appreciation means, because there are ways that you can enjoy someone else's culture while appreciating it and be in the green light, like, hey, let's do this. So an example, I'll bring in one example. So an example would be, buying from small businesses. So buying from small Black, Indigenous, and people of color business, like people who have small businesses. Like, say they sell like beadwork or jewelry or some sort of something that they are selling to someone else. Like, that's fine. But also, like, you can't go ahead and just make what they're making from their culture. That's not fine. But buying things from these groups of people, that's okay.
Mm-hmm. I agree. And it's also like if they're selling it, it means that they're inviting you to buy it, you know? But if it's like something else, unless the community is not inviting you to wear something, you probably shouldn't wear it, like Cheyenne is saying.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like another thing is like making sure that you give credit to, like, when I buy earrings from people, I at least try to like tag them in it and be like, this is the artist, because they don't even get recognition. And more if like a bit, like, say like there's like a business that's capitalizing off indigenous art and they're selling it for cheaper, it's like you don't know who made it, and on top of that they're being exploited for their work. So it's like mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we see that time and time again in corporate capitalistic America, right? Where like a company like Walmart or Target or whatever will steal or borrow or be inspired by an artist's work, and will suddenly
Mm-hmm.
produce their own version of it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
this is especially a significant problem with Sage. And um, just as a note, Sage is not just a native culture thing. It belongs to a lot of Black and African cultures too. They use it, and they use different types of plants that do look like sage. I think there are different types of sage, but correct
Mm-hmm.
me if I'm wrong. Um, so, I often see like a bunch of retailers selling sage and selling abalone shells and
And it also like the communities will tell you like you can like go ahead and use it, but if you're not using it appropriately, you're not gonna get what you're searching for, you know? And it's like you have to learn. These things are learned. They're not just like something that like people wake up and knowing, you know? Because there's like an incorrect way to do things. Actually, especially when it comes to spiritual practices, like people just think like, oh, I'm just gonna do this, but it's like you have to understand the significance of it before you do it.
I mean, I don't identify as Native myself, but I know from my Chinese background that I've seen that before with Asian culture. We have
Mm-hmm.
things that are very specific, even things that are part of like funeral rites and part of burial rites that then get appropriated and used out of context. And it's kind of frustrating, where it's like, oh, like this means something in my culture, um, that's like really personal and really deep and meaningful, and you're using it because you think it's cool decoration or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. I'm thinking about like how people will appropriate like Japanese and Chinese art or like get them tattooed on themselves when it's or
Mm.
like even just like Hawaiian symbols like or like from specific communities in Hawaii. It has a whole history that is their history. So just for someone to just get that tattooed on themselves and make it look similar is wrong because A, they don't understand what they're getting, and like B, that's not your family history, that's not your tradition to get tattooed on yourself, I think. And like even people who identify as white, it's like they're turning away from their own culture, and it's like why? And it's because it comes with a lot of like it that's going to mean that they have to take ownership of a lot of things that they've done, but it doesn't mean that they cannot heal, like I think that's what it is. It's like by adopting these things they feel as though it gives them
Well, I think healing is an important concept. You'll say that. I'm glad you brought that
mm-hmm,
up because you know we are still dealing with the legacy of this oppression. you know like, for some people they might think, well, that was something that happened a long time ago, 20, 30, 40, 50, hundreds of years ago, and whatever, people should just get over it. But I think to myself, we we have things that we haven't reconciled, you know like, and you brought this up, I'll say too, I'm glad you brought it up, is like, look at the disproportionate impact that COVID has had on Native folks.
Yeah.
Like, and this
mm-hmm,
is, this is a 2020 issue. This is happening here in the year 2020, and a lot of it is because, of this legacy of, um, you know, kicking indigenous folks off their land, putting them on reservations, not giving reservations the necessary resources to survive. And so now there's a lack of, access to healthcare, a lack of access to like resources, to clean food, clean water. And so, a lot of those groups are now, in danger from like, physical, illnesses, like COVID.
mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So Cheyenne mentioned, for someone to be appreciative, they would, um, have to be knowledgeable. They would have to do research, ask questions. Is there other stuff that folks can do to indicate appreciation?
We can like shout out where music comes from. Like there is that song that was really popular that was created by Redbone. It's a native like music group, and people are like their song started getting popular because of TikTok, and people were like, hey, like this is native music, like let's make sure that, and so that it's just even recognizing,
Mm-hmm.
like the people where certain music is coming from, just like giving that acknowledgement. Even that is like appreciation. Artists too, like making sure like when you buy art, you buy, you buy art, and that like goes beyond just jewelry. Like it could even be portraits, paintings, like if something inspires you, like say where that came from.
Yeah. Like, yeah, shout out the artist. Make sure you're,
Mhm.
like putting on your story or wherever you want to share, or someone asks you on the street, like, hey, what are you wearing? Who'd you buy that from? Like, hey, it's this artist on Instagram. Like, you should really follow them. Like, or hey, like, check out this artist, and like, make sure you put their at too. People need a link to where they could, support these artists and, appreciate instead of, um, appropriating. So it's really good that we understand like ways of appreciation. And it's also good if you're still kind of like, I kind of want to learn more. Ask the people from that group that are interested in, like, hey, is there a way that I can appreciate your culture without appropriating? And they'll be more than happy to let you know. Like, it's not like an embarrassing question or a stupid question. Like, it's definitely something that they feel they are totally fine with, because when you ask someone, you're listening to them, you're trying to be
Mhm.
genuine, you want to understand what's right and what to do and what not to do. And that's what people want, and that's what people believe is appreciation. Because if we just think about appreciation, like the context in general, it's just like when you show appreciation to your loved ones, you want to do it in a way that will make them happy, not offend them. Like, so we should also keep in mind, like, because I feel like a lot of people just throw certain terms around, but it's good that we're going over these definitions, because it lets us understand what is the meaning behind this, what is cultural appropriation, what is the history behind it, what is appreciation, like
Mhm.
how do we do that. And if y'all know any other like ways of appreciation, you're watching this, like, comment down below other forms of appreciation that works too.
At Mosaic, we've done for the past couple years, we've done or helped support NASA on programs um, at this time of the year concerning, my culture is not a costume. Um, and so this is us doing it again at this time of the year. One of the reasons why we do it is because, of course, Halloween is right around the corner.
Mhm.
Um, so I don't know if y'all had any thoughts or stories or insights around Halloween costumes.
Yes, everybody wants to dress up as a cholo on Halloween. And I'm like, no, you cannot do that. That's like, and I think it's so cool, but it's also like, that's like, I just feel as though that's just disrespectful in the sense that like people have lost their lives due to gang violence, like
Hmm.
people have lost family members due to gang violence. So it's just like to just dress up as one because you think it's cool, like that's not okay. And like you never know who will be in the room that sees that might be triggered by it,
Hmm.
or like might just be like, so I just think about that. That's like the first thing that comes to my mind, because that's just one that I always see.
Right. It also perpetuates a stereotype.
It
Mm-hmm.
perpetuates a stereotype too, and it also, and like that style of clothing also has like black influence. It also has like Chicano, Latino, Latinx, um like history to it.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
That's the one I can think about. I have seen people dress up as like native people in the past too, and
It's
that's
still
just
too, like, if you go to
mm-hmm.
Halloween, like, you just go in there and you find like Reservation Princess or like something around those lines, and it's just like,
Pocahontas.
are you serious? Like, and another thing, I feel like, this is my opinion, but another form of appreciation I would think would be a form of appreciation would be calling people out that, like, your friends, only if you feel safe to, if you feel comfortable, but calling
Mm-hmm.
people out who culturally appropriate, or not, you don't have to call them out, but just kind of like educate them, like, especially if they're friend. Maybe there's a lot of people who don't know, but then there's a lot of people who are aware, but they do it anyway. So, educating your friends, family, anyone, in your social group, if you feel comfortable, tell those people, like, hey, like, do you know the cultural significance of what you're wearing, or do you know that this isn't even what that group of people wears, but also that you're appropriating, and that if you want to show your appreciation, you need to do, A, B, and C, and this isn't one of them. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you're kind of benefiting off the backs of Black and Indigenous and people of color. So, just calling those people out is also, appreciating those people, because you're defending that.
Mm-hmm. And if you care for someone, you're going to let them know and like educate them, because like if it's someone that's close to you and they say something or do something that's not okay, if you really care about them, you're gonna let them know,
Mm-hmm.
This is what so it's like, that's true.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. I think, part of the reason why we do My Culture is Not a Costume is so that people understand that, it's more than just one culture, and it's more than just one instance,
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot of folks are affected by people who just don't think carefully about or critically about what they do or wear.
Another important thing about dressing as someone else is like, usually like Halloween costumes are very like sexualized. Like, there's a lot of like skin showing and everything. Like, I'm not saying it's bad to show your skin, but what you're wearing, as in you're trying to reflect someone's culture, that is not okay. Like, first of all, what that does, it perpetuates the sexualization of certain groups, and it
Mm-hmm.
actually puts them at danger. You're actually promoting violence against those groups who already, are sexualized and are, targeted of domestic violence or, sexual assault. Like, for example, missing murdered Indigenous women.
The thing with the dress, with like people sexualizing Native women and dress costume is true. It's just like, think about how many times people dress up as like Pocahontas or some, and the dress is like super short, and it's giving this impression that like, yeah, and
It
yeah, with
perpetuates violence.
mm-hmm. Again, and those women already experience violence, so it's like to do that is kind of in a way, yeah, I don't know. Thank you for bringing that up, because it's true.
Yeah, and it's true for many other, like, I've seen, like, in those magazines, like, when I was a kid, I would get the Spirit magazine in the mail every year, and I would see a lot of people, like, a lot of, like, Egyptian, like, very, like, provocative, like, dresses and stuff like that, and I know that's a cultural appropriation, too, like, the Cleopatra, like, what people, they're wearing, the articles of clothing that they're wearing, like there are a lot of, I'm pretty sure there's a lot of Egyptian people who think that's offensive as well. Like, and like I said, it's perpetuating violence against another group. Like, this group already like deals with a lot of violence, and then here you are at a college party or wherever you are, kind of just like, you're having a lot of fun, but there's another person who actually identifies as that race or ethnic group, but they're actually, being harassed or, being discriminated against because of who they are, who their, what their identity is.
Another way to appreciate is, I remember one time, Cheyenne, you mentioned the Lonely Cafe in the Bay Area. It's like showing up to places like that and eating there, because they teach you, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Cafe Alone is actually a really great great place to experience Alone cuisine. And I actually have no idea how they're doing in COVID times, but if you ever get a chance to support them, they're an amazing place.
Attending like community open powwows, because those are intended to like educate people. So it's like showing up, but not showing up in attire that's not your own attire, just showing up as yourself.
And show I would say in those situations, show up from a place of humility too.
Yeah.
That you want to learn and you want to understand, and you're not necessarily trying to take it.
Yeah, and then for folks who don't know what cultural humility is, which is a very important word, it's basically, the ability to maintain internal stance that is, other oriented to other in relation to aspects of cultural identity and that are important to that person. So basically coming from, like what Chris said, coming from a place of understanding, like wanting to learn about someone else's cultural identity and being open-minded, listening to what they have to say. Because like a lot of people don't really understand what, that word means, but, there's a lot of like things that our communities can take away from that, just to avoid like, hurting other people,
So this is probably a good transition to say, we're doing this program as part of the Dia de los Muertos series that's being put together on campus. Dia de los Muertos is a really important holiday for some Latinx communities. As we talk about, how to show appreciation and approach things from a culturally appreciative, cultural humility kind of perspective, I don't know if the two of you have any thoughts on how folks can approach like a holiday or a celebration in that way.
Not judging, because I know whenever people mention like ancestral altars, it's like weird to them, or like people will say like, oh, like isn't that scary, like isn't that weird? But it's like by using those words you're saying that it's not something that should just exist and like be. And I know I get that when like I mentioned one, they're just like, oh, like that's so weird, like why would you want to invite, but and that's because there's a misunderstanding of it, like and it's like for people who do have ancestral altars, is like that's because the relationship between that person and their ancestors is sacred, and so to be judged by it or to like, that's not cool, because it's, I don't know, like that should be common sense, but it's like I've gotten some reactions that are really interesting. If there's like community altars, like going and seeing what people create. If there's like an open event for something that they're allowing people to do. So if there's like any, trying to think, like last year during Dia de los Muertos, we carried around an altar honoring the lives of like children that have passed away in detention centers. And so by participating in those type of like spiritual, cultural, and political activities is one way I would say is to appreciate, just like being there and showing support.
As part of the series, we do have a couple of those, right? So if you want to learn more about the history of Dia de los Muertos, how it's celebrated, how it's recognized, Maria Cruz from the Trios program and SSP has a lecture that she's putting on. And I know that Lily Gengai from the Centro is also doing a program. Check out the library. The Martin Luther King Library is doing a virtual altar that you can kind of experience in like virtual reality. And it's kind of a cool way to see at least one version of what, an altar might look like. So thank you, Cheyenne and Ilse, for joining me on this conversation.
It was nice having this awesome conversation, and there's so much more to learn about cultural appropriation and appreciation every single day.
Yeah, thank you for having us. Honestly, Cheyenne and I will get together and we'll just have these conversations on our own. So to be able to like have a space to just talk about it and know like other people are going to listen is pretty cool. And shout out Mosaic, shout out the Chica Next Line Next Success Center, shout out the Black Student Success Center, shout out the Gay Straight LGBTQ Center, shout out Peer Connections. All the groups on campus that do wonderful work that like make sure to make the students of color on campus feel comfortable and safe.
Yeah. And shout out to Trios and SSP Maria for putting this together. So
And
thank
the
you all.
Work Maloney for allowing us to be on their land.
If y'all got any questions about anything like native culture, cultural appropriation, or anything, we are more than happy to email you back. If y'all got any questions, if y'all want to be added to our emailing list for next semester, let us know and we could totally do that for you.